So welcome everybody to the third CPC online language justice interpreter training. Welcome back to the folks who have been doing this for a couple of weeks now. And welcome to some new folks who are joining us for the first time. I'm Ada. I'm the one who emails and writes you text messages. And I work for the Center for Participatory Change, and I'm organizing these online trainings. Like I said, I'm super excited about today. And I was thinking about when I got into language justice work, the conversations that we were having were about access. They were about interpreters in the space, like making sure we needed interpreters in the space. It was about interpretation equipment. And we still need to have access, and we still need to have interpreters in the space, and we still want interpretation equipment. But it's very exciting for me to also be a language justice interpreter and be part of these conversations as language is changing. And so whether that has to do about race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender, like I feel that language justice and social justice interpreters like watching things change. And so that's really exciting for me. So before we dive into today's session, I want you all to think a little bit about yourself. And I want you to think about, like, what is something about you that you wish was more seen or more visibilized or more recognized? See? So what's something about you that you wish was more highlighted or seen or recognized? Maybe all of us have things that people ask me about that, or I have opportunities to talk about this. But what are some things that I wish more people knew about me? What is something about myself that I wish was like uplifted a little bit more? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to split you off into pairs. We're going to do the Zoom rooms. You all don't have to do anything, but I'm going to split you off into pairs, and you're going to be like in a private conversation with someone else. And I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to share that. Like, what are those things that you wish like were highlighted a little bit more about you? What part of your identity? See? Does that make sense? Okay. 1 second. Okay. And I'll bring you back in a couple of minutes. Make sure that you have time for both people you'll have like 3-4 minutes. So just make sure that both people have a chance to share. Are there any questions? Okay, I'll see you soon. Ta-da! Awesome. So are there a couple of people who want to share with the whole group about their conversation? Anybody who wants to share how that went? Ay, bien penosos. Again. Monica, you want to go for it?
Okay. So I forgot who I was speaking with. Gina. Okay. So she ended up bringing up, like, so we talked about, it's kind of a heavy question, but one of them was what it means to be Mexican. So that was really interesting just because, like, being born there and not being born there. So she said that she was actually born in Mexico, but that she's gotten before that, she's not 100% Mexican, whatever that means. And I was telling her how I've gotten that before, but not even from like Mexican friends. Like I have a Colombian friend, and I was actually born here. So sometimes she's like, you're not 100% Mexican because you weren't born there. We're just kind of unraveling that topic.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else wants to share from their group, from their small group? One more person, you can do it.
Okay, I'll go. So, my group was with Pravina, so it was the Houston group. And our main, I guess what we really talked about was how the assumptions that people make based on how we look or how we expressed ourselves. Like, for me, I identify as genderqueer, and use they, them pronouns, but have a very femme identity. And I like heels, I like wearing makeup, I like overall, wearing glitter and fur, and like sometimes being very gender fucky, but for the most part, I dress very femme. So people assume that I identify as like female when it's not, that's not my identity. And for Pravina, it was specifically related with like race and how people perceive her as being, within Asian identity, but actually it's like South Asian identity and like the distinctions between that.
Awesome. Thank you. One last person. Is there anyone who really would love to share with the whole group?
I really appreciated, can you hear?
Yeah.
Carolina, she spoke about how she had been, I believe that, I'm not sure if I got this correct, but that now you're a citizen and I'm not sure where you are, if you're in the US. But that she was undocumented for 20 years before that process. I think that was what I got. And I thought that was really interesting because last night I was at customs for the US and there was no interpreter for the side where it was just Mexican citizens passing through. And you could tell like there was a discrepancy between what was being said and what wasn't. And the agent was like really intense to the guy. And he was just like, I'm not really sure what you're saying. And it seemed like it could have been an easy question. And then I had him ask me different questions. And he was very like, it was almost like trying to get you to say something you didn't want to say. So I thought that was really interesting that Carolina was talking about how that was her identity and nobody really could see it.
Yeah. I agree that this is starting off a little bit more like in a like heavy question place, but these are things that are important to us, right? Like being Mexican, being South Asian, like being undocumented, like that's part of my identity and that's important to me. And I wanted us to start today's session, which is going to be on queering language. To talk about queering language requires some level of vulnerability. And so I wanted to kind of start with our own stories and our own experiences before jumping into like nuts and bolts and, vocab and things like that. So I appreciate you kind of like starting off today's session with this pair share. My hope is that today we can have a little bit of dialogue, because some of the things that we've heard from interpreters is like, I have questions about ungendering language or queering language or LGBTQ vocab, and I don't know where to ask or who to ask. So I hope that we can have a dialogue, and that requires kind of us being kind and patient and vulnerable with each other. And I also hope that we'll have a chance for practice and skill building and sharing resources. Like, I want all of these sessions to, at the end of the session, folks to be like, like valió la pena, it was worth it. I got something out of this. So hopefully today we'll have conversation, but also like skill building, practice, and sharing resources. So I've asked two folks who have been participating in the training to share a little bit about what queering language means to them. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Genesis and then to Gabriel, and just let them talk a little bit about what queering language means to them. So, te lo paso.
Okay. So querying language for me, it's been a process, because definitely language, specifically when you're going from English to Spanish is very gendered. If you're talking about certain vocations or things, it's a very gendered language, at least from my experience. So it's been a process to trying to overall create inclusiveness whenever I'm actually interpreting. I think I've gotten better, but that's from what I think, but it's still a process. I'm a community health worker in Houston, so I get to do a lot of health topics, and pretty much anything related to health, I go into the community and talk to folks. And most of my curriculum is bilingual in Spanish. So whenever I get to talk about health stuff or anatomy, I tend to definitely navigate into the realm of, like estas personas que tienen menstruación, o personas que pueden quedar embarazadas, o personas que pueden tener cáncer. So I tend to focus on using like person or nouns that are very much like people, folks, individuals, instead of just being like mujeres que quedan embarazadas, who are pregnant, or hombres que tienen cáncer de próstata, men who have prostate cancer. So I tend to use like words that focus on population, like overall population, instead of just being very specific. Of course, certain issues that might impact the LGBTQ, then that's when you make the distinction of like, personas de género no conformen, pueden tener no buena experiencia en la industria médica, por blah, 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 blah. So folks who are gender non-conforming might have a bad experience. So it really depends on what it is that specific space is asking for. But for me, it's always easier to just talk in general and just be as specific about certain things, such as health. Like health, it's easier to talk about body parts than it is to talk about identities.
Great. Thank you. Gabriel,
Okay.
¿quieres compartir? Do you want to share?
Yeah. Man, I don't know. I really don't know. I recently, I wouldn't say came out, because come out sounds really dramatic. But over the last few years, I've been discovering that neither manhood nor womanhood really fit me. So I identify as queer, because queer just feels right. Non-binary even focuses on the binary in a weird way. So queer just feels like it's such a big word that it encompasses everyone. But even in that journey that I'm going through in English, where I use they, them pronouns, and I discovered recently that when I offered really other people to use he, him pronouns, this was something that was for them and was not for me. It was not because I identified that way, but because I figured they would be able to use them. It's been hard to make that transition in Spanish. Incredibly important, or incredibly difficult. But so queering language has been a significant part of my self-exploration in English. and a difficult journey of my self-identity in Spanish. What's weird is that makes you realize that you have an identity in English and Spanish. You have an identity in multiple cultures. And I even have a friend a coworker friend whom I love dearly, but is always picking at me around the use of X. So like nosotros instead of nosotras or nosotros. And like even more recently, I have a friend who's from Honduras, and I was seeking permission really to use the nosotros, instead of the X, because the X is awkward. It is, when you speak it, it's difficult. And for people it's almost like this additional annoying barrier for people who are learning to queer language. And I was really seeking permission to use the A, and I asked, like, is it okay for us to use A and X? Because I'd heard and learned that X, the argument is that the X honors indigenous communities and non-binariness that existed before colonization. But my friend made a good point, and what he said was Spanish is colonial. So it doesn't matter what letter or you put in or take away, it's still a colonial language. So if you really want to be decolonizing the language, you need to learn a different language, like not Spanish. And so I've been wrestling with that. Porque like right now, I'm not very good at using gender neutral terms for myself, let alone for other people, and neutralizing gender in Spanish in the ways that I have been able to in English. But I think that first barrier of using a for me has kind of been crossed, where now I'm like, oh, okay, les niñas instead of los niños or las niñas. No, like I said, nosotros or nosotres instead of nosotras or nosotros. It's important, and who knows what I'll discover about myself and what I'll help other people discover about themselves by making language accessible to more than just manhood and womanhood. I'm excited for what that looks like, and it's a difficult journey even for me, a queer. So just be compassionate and patient with yourself, but don't stop working on it. And gracias, Ada.
Gosh, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. So I wanna ask folks, like, as interpreters, or when you are interpreting, what are some of the places, like when we talk about queering language, like where are some of the places that you have tripped or that you have stumbled, or where you're afraid of tripping or stumbling? So yeah, what are some of the places that you all have struggled? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm just gonna say, like, and put this out there just so y'all feel more comfortable. I call myself man in Spanish. Because I don't know. I don't know it's difficult to find an identity or a word that fits what I fit into in Spanish. So a lot of times I slip up and call myself a man, and I'm like, and then I have to pause and be like, but I don't identify that way. What's going on? So that's one of the main things. It's what am I looking at internally that I can then apply externally, and how am I identifying myself in ways that don't even fit me, that are then also translating into identifying other people in those ways.
And I think I see a message from Anais, which says La Niñez. And I'm not sure if you're offering La Niñez as an option, or if La Niñez is a question, like something that you've struggled with. As an option. Gracias, Anais. Yeah. So I think we're already hearing some of the things that people are using, right? So getting it out of los niños, las niñas, just talk about childhood. Gabriel talked about X, talked about E. what are some of the stories? Yeah, what are some of your stories? Stephanie, is that you? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
go for it.
hi. Stephanie, she, her, hers. And I think that's something that I really resonated with what Gabrielle was saying about like the E and the X and like how we navigate those spaces. And something that like I'm learning is how we are also like meeting people where they're at. And that's like a struggle that I'm having because like we know that like folks are not going to be as like radical as like we are. And like how do we stay true to our identities and like how do we stay true to that? And I think that like using the E is like a and this is the way I see it, like using the E as like a soft opening, so folks can like understand like, yeah, like it's not so in your face, like use the X, you know? And I mean, that's what's people's comfortability. But that's like something that like I'm struggling with and like learning with, especially as like I'm like trying to translate.
Yeah. And Anna has a hand up, and then Carolina has a question in the chat. So Anna, do you want to go?
Yeah, I have a couple of things to say. I'm also just curious, I'm first curious if the Indian language is gendered and what that looks like, because I'm familiar with Latin-based languages, but I'm very unfamiliar with other languages, especially from Asia, and I just don't know. So I'm curious about that. And I think two things, gendering is hard for me, being somebody that has grown speaking English. So it's one of the errors that I make most commonly. In fact, I just had a Spanish class like 2 hours ago. And because I didn't grow up with that, it's very hard for me to know which sounds right. That sometimes people will just say, oh, you'll know it when you hear it. Like, is it la or L? And I'm like, it actually doesn't work in my brain because I didn't have that growing up. So it is a stumbling point for me, but not because it's something I do intentionally. It's just an error that I make. And I had a third thought, but I forgot what it was.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Indian. So depending on what language we are talking about, yes, it is highly gendered. So for example, Hindi, which is a national language that is spoken by the majority of the population, and I would say majority of the population from the north. Southern people from southern India do not necessarily speak Hindi as their main language, but know of Hindi. But there is a lot of resistance in speaking Hindi as well. So Hindi, which I have known because I grew up in a city like Bombay, which is like similar to New York, it's highly gendered. But because I also belong to the southern part of India, my Hindi is not as, and because I belong to the southern part of India and because I grew up in a city like Bombay, it's not as gendered as it would be in the other regions where Hindi is spoken. So it's very complex. So each region has its own version of how gendered the language can get. So for example, someone who is from the eastern part of India and would speak Hindi, they would not gender it. Because so when I say eastern part of India, I'm basically talking about Calcutta or West Bengal, because the language spoken there is Bengali, and Bengali in itself is not it's not gendered. So when they speak Hindi, when people from that region speak Hindi, they do not gender Hindi as much. And then when they come to the mainstream, there's all of this thing about how they are made fun of because they're not gendering the language and things like that. So it's a little complicated. So I don't have a straight answer for that. But this was a question that Ada did ask me this afternoon as well.
And will you share the article that you sent?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I will share it to the group. Yes, I will.
Awesome. Thank you. Other places where you feel like you're tripping or struggling? This can be like horror stories or I'm afraid of doing this. Or what should I do there? Yeah, or it can even be like, what questions do you have? If you want to ask, like, what questions do you have for the group?
Can I give advice?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you fuck up someone's pronouns, don't make it about yourself. So let's say I'm talking to Sasa and I'm like, he, and Sasa's like, actually, I use she or they. Sasa, I actually don't know your pronouns. What are your pronouns, Sasa?
There we go. She, her, and ella in Spanish.
All right. So if I say he and Sasa's like, she, I'm like, and I respond with, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to offend you. And you take 5 minutes to apologize. You have wasted 5 minutes of my life. All you got to do is say, it's like when like I call her my work grandma. Whenever she corrects my Spanish, I just am like, I say the word and then I use it from there on.
Mm-hmm.
And just do the same thing. Say, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Then restate whatever you just said with the correct pronouns. Don't make a big deal about it, and definitely don't make it about you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and adding on to what Gabriel said, because I feel that it happens a lot of times when we're trying to like not fuck up, but it happens. It's you only need to, say like my bad,
Mm-hmm.
repeat instead of like my bad, talk about it 5 minutes, send an email, then send a text. Like because it's happened probably a couple of times where it's like just just it's fine. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
I don't need an email or a text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brenda, do you have a question? No. Okay. You're just raising your hand? Carolina Siliceo, do you have a question?
I do. I have found myself in spaces where, for whatever reason, when introductions are made, they are not asking for the individuals to introduce the pronoun. So when everything starts switching over, in most cases, to Spanish, then I guess you could just use a neutral pronoun. Would be the solution, but it has happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do folks think about that? What do you do then? Like the meeting has started. No, people introduce themselves. Pronouns were not part of the introductions. What are some things that people do then?
I would say that just it's never good to assume. So it's okay to, when you're gonna refer to a person, just be like, I'm sorry, can you state your pronouns? I think maybe the difficulty there could be that a lot of folks in the room haven't ever heard of what a pronoun is, or like, obviously they're using pronouns every day, but they might not understand it in the context. So it would require a level of education or political education, which is great. But that's what we do here, at least at my job. It's like you take the initiative by introducing yourself using your pronoun, and then when you talk to people or have them repeat themselves, be like, I'm sorry, can you say your pronoun? Kind of like how Gabriel did, just like not assume, just went ahead and asked.
And Natalie, but what if you're not the facilitator? Like you're over here with you're over here with the microphone. You're the interpreter.
Well, in that case, I would go to the facilitator in a moment of break and ask them to please clarify, because it's important as the interpreter to make sure that you're getting people's pronouns correct.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. That could be an opportunity to, like, with the folks that have hired you, just to say, like, next time, or like you said, in a break, like it would really be helpful for the interpretation team if you all did pronouns next time when you introduce yourselves. I think that's a good place to advocate, before a break or after a meeting. That's a great idea. Other folks or questions that you all would like to ask the group? This is it. I'll go for it for a minute.
I think my main issue is just the awkwardness of the X or the A, like having, just adding that in, and it just feels awkward when I'm speaking to say X, and then the A is also feels unnatural to me, and that it's not how I usually was taught to learn to say those words. And so just adding that in and becoming more fluent with those differing letters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do folks have? What do folks do? Like, what has been helpful?
I had something to say, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just to continue with the problems that one faces, and then I would go to, and then I would definitely go to how I kind of like address it, but like I'm not convinced by how I address it. So one of the problems that I face, as in the little interpretation that I do around, like specifically when it comes to gender, so there are a lot of religious biases. So it becomes very difficult for me to actually, like in Spanish, use the X, etc., or similar words in Hindi. So I often refer to not being a female or not being a male, because that's what is easily probably understood, but that's offensive too. It's taken in a very negative manner. So but I have no other words to kind of describe or how I would portray that, because many individuals, even if they identify themselves in a certain way, are not very open about it because of the South Asian community because these individuals whom I work with are immigrants. So they're not that exposed, or they have not come out of the closet specifically to feel comfortable to talk about their identities in a manner that's not acceptable to the larger community. So then it becomes a very difficult situation as an interpreter to how to kind of navigate that space, respecting how the individual identify himself or herself or them. So then I usually, in that spur of the moment, refer to not being a female, not being to male. And then depending on an opportune moment, try to explain that further so that it's not taken negatively, or clarify that it should not be taken negatively, and this is an identity that people can have, and it might, and especially in the US where things are more openly, so I have to kind of get that cultural context a little bit and kind of compare to where they come from. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think does someone want to jump in? Maria?
Can you hear me? I got a question for you. And when you are doing interpretations in CPC consecutive, do you think we should, from now on, all the interpreters, when we do presentations and in all the introduction of confidentiality and such, do you think we should start asking people to just do their pronouns from now on? Do you think it would be a good idea? Like to start, as interpreters, start saying, well, besides saying like, hello, my name is Maria Garcia, just want to let you know that this is, all the information here will be confidential. All the information that we'll be sharing in Spanish or English or vice versa, any language will be known in the other or interpreted in the other language. And I would like to know, when you introduce yourself, would you please tell me your pronouns from now on? Do you think that, I don't know, that will start some sort of a change here to be more acknowledged, at least, how the people or the specific person can be addressed?
Right, because with Natalie, we talked about like talking to the organizers, But that's a way that you could also be, and I think by modeling, I would definitely be like, I'm Maria Garcia, I use she, her pronouns, you know, so that it's also like, everybody's there is like, okay, got it, check, moving on. I like that. I like it. I've never done it, but I like that. I like that suggestion.
Yeah, we'll see what my supervisor says, but maybe I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
I just want to answer Amanda's question, and then I'll pass it to you, Gabriel. But I think, no, Amanda, so I can look at you. I think that I think practice, you know, just like last week we talked about like vocab, like your vocab is not going to expand just miraculously, like X, ellos, ellas, la niñez, you know, it's going to require some practice. I think about interpreting as like an old kind of skill, like it's like an old kind of skill where it's like a guild or you have a mentor, like it takes, I don't know, like you're an ironsmith. I don't know. I just think it's like an old kind of skill that takes time and practice. So it's cheesy to say, pero yeah. Okay, Gabriel, and then we're going to move on. Brenda, now are you really raising your hand or no? Okay, now Brenda's really raising her hand. So Gabriel quickly, and then we'll give Brenda a chance, and then we'll move on.
I would definitely say, please give everyone the opportunity to share their pronouns. That doesn't mean, like, maybe you know someone personally and they're not out to their parents, for example, or they're not out to someone and they don't want to share their actual pronouns. But it gives you the opportunity to know what pronouns to call them in that moment, because some people use different pronouns depending on how they feel that day too. So like the more work y'all allies can do to take the burden off of us outing ourselves or like being the first person after 30 people have introduced themselves to say our pronouns, the better it is for us and the easier it is for us.
And Gabriel, that makes me think that as people who are in smaller communities, I mean, some of us are like in big cities, but sometimes I think like we're in small communities, and some of us are in small cities where you're like, oh, that person, you know, you're going to see that person at the quinceañera that weekend. I think that's really smart to be like, what happened at the quinceañera? What happened last night at the club? Like, I don't know anything about that. I just know what I know right now when I walked in here. Okay, Brenda, last comment before we move on. We can't hear you. Do you want to type it out? I'm gonna go like this. Here we go. A ver. Context. Tell me more. Yeah. So, dale. Can everyone see it? The chat? So I wanted to add to Amanda's point that we need to take into account context. I work with domestic violence victims. And the Spanish speakers sometimes have limited literacy. And they have immediate needs, definitely. Yeah. So they don't really care about pronouns, no matter how hard we want to advocate. Yeah, I agree. And that's also what Stephanie said about like the people on the other end. And I will be like super honest and straightforward with you all. Like when I think about queering language, for me, it's about, I'm trying to break out of this binary, right? I'm trying to break out of this, I'm trying to break the binary. I interpret from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. That means I interpret between languages where I have to assign genders to refrigerators and rivers and moons, but sometimes the moon, but sometimes it's this gender, but sometimes it's that gender. I interpret between languages where the plural defaults to masculine. And I want to interpret in ways that reflect my community. I want to interpret in ways that reflect what the speaker is being said and respects the speaker and respects that speaker's identity and what's important to that person. And I want to challenge oppressive gender norms. Like that's my agenda, that's my personal agenda. That doesn't mean that every single time I get on a microphone, I am challenging oppressive gender norms. That doesn't mean that when I'm sitting here alone, right now, va a llegar mi viejo, that doesn't mean that I'm always using an X when I'm speaking. Because I think it's really important to say that the idea of queering anything is not to fucking put it in a box, right? Like that's the opposite of queering anything. The idea of queering anything is not to be like, this is the rule, you always have to do it, this is wrong, this is right, and I'm gonna police the people who use the X. Oh, the X is so out of there, and everyone's using the E now. Oh, you're using the E? Like, the idea is not to like police each other and make each other feel bad. So I think that, again, if we're talking about queering languages, breaking a binary, things are gonna change, things are gonna flow. You're going to have opportunities for the A. You're going to have opportunities, ellos, ellas, ellos. And then sometimes you're just like, oh my God, like this person needs this right now. And I just need to focus on the best interpreting that I can. And to do the best interpreting that I can right now, I'm going to lose some of this stuff. No hay una regla. There's not a steadfast, hard rule on this. But I do want us to, and you all are going to do in Lexington and Louisville and, in Knoxville, you all are going to do whatever you want to do. I have no control over that. But I do want us to start like planting and playing with these ideas as social justice interpreters. So I appreciate that. Gracias. Okay, practice time. I am going to split you up. I'm a fan of the Zoom rooms. I am going to split you up into small groups. I am going to give you 4 sentences, and I want you to, with your group, think about how you would interpret these sentences. You have been hired to go to this conference, to go to a meeting, to go to wherever you're at. You're the interpreter, and you have been asked to interpret these sentences. Okay, I'm gonna say them out loud just because in case when I send the chat, I don't know if everybody can see it, so I'm gonna tell you the sentences, okay? So it's gonna be, the first one is, I have 3 siblings. I have 3 siblings. The second sentence is going to be, this is my friend Nico. They use they, them pronouns. The third one is, as a non-binary trans person. Hold on. The third sentence is, as a non-binary trans person, I never thought I'd be a parent. And then the last one is going to be, everyone is welcome to the queer Latinx dance party. Okay? So you're going to have a couple of minutes to work with your small team to interpret these 4 sentences. ¿Listos? Hold on, recreate. 1 second. Okay. See you soon.
A unos años más seguro que va a haber más lenguaje en español, o sea, sobre todo en español que es tan gender.
Yeah.
Y que mientras más la gente esté reconociendo los efectos dañinos del binario, la gente va a estar peleando en contra de eso y resistiendo, se va a crear más lenguaje.
Yeah, I agree. Porque solo este año, o sea, solo en este año han cambiado las cosas. Solo en este año, te digo, Sadres, este año empecé a ver queer, C-U-I-R, queer, boom, done, you know? That was like this year. Yeah.
Man, that'd be so rude, Ada.
¿Qué?
That'd be so rude.
I gave you a warning. So we are a little bit over time. So instead of I want to share some resources with you. So I'd rather like share resources with you than like hear back from folks. How do people feel about that? See, you felt like, okay, great. And if you have like a super, like the best one, like Selva and I, we talked about sadres, which is the word that I just saw for the first time in my life. I know sadres con X. So if you have a really good one and you want to drop that in the chat, like a really good translation or interpretation that you did, please drop those in there and we can watch them. Mientras tanto, les quiero compartir, now I'm switching to English. I want to share some resources with you all. And I'm going to include this in the notes when I send you like the video link. I'm going to include these resources in here. So this first one is this really cool Moscas de Colores. And they have an LGBT glossary in Spanish that defines the terms. So this is a great place to be like, you know, what's the difference between transformista and drag queen? Like here, like this is a great glossary for that. So that's called Moscas de Colores. There's this Uniting Communities curriculum by the Western State Center, I think. And they also have a glossary, and this glossary is in English and Spanish. So you can start like comparing the two. But you can already see like género queer, HAV, FTM por sus siglas en inglés. And so there's these two glossaries that I think are good. The Mexican government put this out in 2009, 10 recommendations for non-sexist language. So whenever anyone tells you that this is US imperialism and that queering language is only people in the United States doing this, pull out this 2009 document from the Mexican government that gives you tips on non-sexist language. They have some good ones. I think Anais would like, they have a good example of how like alternatives. So I like that one. I found this YouTube video, which is like, I think it's from Argentina, about how to use non-sexist language. It's really cute. This is to convince your friends. It's like one of these 5 minutes, like it moves really quickly kind of YouTube videos. Again, there was this glossary that that I found by this Asamblea No Binaria. And so this is another great glossary. And they have, I liked how they split it up between lenguaje no sexista, but see how lenguaje no sexista still keeps the binary, amigos, amigos, ellas, ellas, padres, madres. And then they're like, and then there's inclusive language. And I like to think about the difference between like, what's the difference between non-sexist language and inclusive language. Again, like I tried to find examples from Latin America. This is a group in Puerto Rico called La Sombrilla Queer, and they have a really cute Instagram account. And they have a couple of these, like how to expand your vocabulary. So I liked that one. Of course, here's the shameless plug. CPC has a podcast, Se Escucha. And episode 3 is specifically focused on queering language. Our compas Catalina Nieto and Ceci Sainz Becerra from Atlanta joined us on this episode 3. So yeah. Oh, and then there's this cute infographic. I put this on the Se Escucha Twitter account, just about like, oh, how possibly could I use the E? Like that's impossible. And that there's a cute little infographic that shows you that it's not actually impossible. So yeah, so I'll put all of these resources in the notes and send that to you all. Yes, I'm going to email these resources. So to end on time, can I hear one thing? Can we each really quickly say one thing that we're going to try next time we're interpreting? What's one queering language practice that we are going to try? And so just so it doesn't get awkward of like who goes next, I'm going to call on folks old teacher style. Starting with Sasa, what's one practice you're going to try?
I gotta do it. So in the group, I think what a big takeaway that I'm going to use, especially like tomorrow, like is like the term mapi, which is the first time I've ever heard of, which is like my papi, but it can join to be include. I know, right? What you would call it in lieu of padres or like so definitely going to take that home and I'm going to use it everywhere now.
Amanda?
I'm going to use the E more, hermanes, etc.
Awesome. Brenda? Oh, Brenda has to type it. Okay, while Brenda's typing it, Natalie, do you want to share what you want to try?
Mm-hmm. Using ella for they, them.
Awesome. Stephanie?
I think also getting like comfortable with using E. I think that the infographic is really cute, and like I want to try to use the glossary too and like try to incorporate those words like more regularly as I'm speaking and not like be uncomfortable or like shy away from them.
Awesome. Srijana? Oh no, Srijana just left. Oh no, here comes Srijana. Do you want to say what practice you want to use or what you want to start practicing with queering language? Hold on. Oh, yeah. Maybe he's also typing. Okay. What about Pravina?
Yeah, I think I'm going to first start trying to not use the male gender by default because I find myself using that very often. So I think that's going to be the first thing that I would kind of do. And also then find an appropriate term for using they, them pronouns. Because in the exercise that we just did, I kind of, struggled with that the most. So those are two things that I would kind of practice more.
Thank you. Brenda's going to try to use the E too. Anna, do you want to share?
I think I really want to read that document from the Mexican government.
Perfect.
That's super interesting to me.
Awesome. Sophia?
I was thinking that depending on the context, if it was like opportune to ask the person that I'm interpreting for what their pronoun was, if that was a possibility, then I would interject to try to make that happen so I could properly communicate.
Awesome. Carolina Siliceo? Hold on, Carolina, we can't hear you.
Pronoun when I introduce myself as an interpreter.
Nice. So you use because you were cut off a little bit. So you would introduce your pronouns when you introduced yourself as an interpreter. Cool.
Yes.
Catalina?
Yeah, I wanted to try doing the interpreting to a podcast during my free time, but really be intentional about using the e.
Juan?
Yeah, using the A and the X and the AG that someone said, we were trying to think about they and didn't know how, and also the MAPI, we also had that question, so it's interesting. Yeah, a lot to learn. Thank you all. Yeah.
Maria? And I can unmute you guys if that makes it easier.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm asking about pronouns, and depending on the responses and the context, using more E.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Georgina?
I need to practice with the E and the A. But yeah, also just making it a practice to state my pronouns.
That's really nice. I like that one. Gabriel?
I want to use the A more, and all those resources were incredibly helpful because now I know where to look, and I'm queer.
Mónica Santillán.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I was telling Gina how querying language is completely new to me. So literally everything that has been spoken, especially like the E's and whatnot, it's definitely something I want to start implementing more, make a more conscious effort to do, as well as introducing my pronouns. Because our workshop in Louisville was the first time I've had to do that, and our meetings before were the first time I've done that. So, continuing that in my future interaction.
Cool. Anais, I'm going to let you type yours if you want to type yours. Yeah? And then I'll ask Ana Baranda one practice that you're going to do. Oh, there goes Anais. Yes.
Hola. Sí,
Hola.
well, so while on the go, it's ideal if one could ask, not assume, and also advocate and use one's pronouns. But on the go, I'd like, to be eclectic in a way, and I like the difference in language that's not sexist, and also going with neutral terms. Going more feminine usually as well. I tend to, but yeah, depending who you're talking to as well, because you don't want the message to be lost. And also in Spanish, when one could find some terms that are probably feminine, but now I also want to include people that are not in the binary. So
yeah,
I get it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Anna.
I'll review the resources and I'll add some of these terms that we use to my, I guess my glossary, but I also want to reflect deeply on the comment that our compañeras Gabriel shared about our role as allies, or just like our roles of acknowledging our backgrounds. So that's a deep thought that I really want to reflect on this week.
Thank you. Couple more folks. Genesis?
For me, is definitely using the E more, because I still use the X, but I feel that I feel the E has become more easier for me to say, more so than the X. And I think definitely what was it Natalie about not necessarily taking space, but like whenever you're in a setting where pronouns aren't necessarily talked about, actually, like whenever there's a break, talk to like the organizers, because I feel that sometimes as like interpreters, we don't necessarily want to be part of the space, which, you know, it's fine. Like, we're interpreting there, we're supposed to just facilitate all of these languages and all of these conversations, but then at the same time, it's like, as social justice interpreters, we also have to take a bit of accountability and be like, hey, like, clarification, pronouns, or hey, like, just so that we don't perpetrate like certain things in these spaces.
Awesome. And lastly, Selva?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi everybody, I'm Selva. I think I want to talk to a cousin that's in Chile, that it's finding out their own like gender identity, and they are queer, and seeing like what kind of new language is coming up over there. Because as we were talking with you, I feel like there's new stuff, like language is always changing, and it's happening really fast right now. And I think that being here in the US, trying to figure out like easier ways to communicate in Spanish, even though there are going to be new things for everybody, but kind of like keeping up also with some of the new stuff that's showing up over there, and not assuming pronouns and using more ella.
Awesome. Thank you so much, compas. I have a bunch of rose quartz here behind me. I had the rose sprays. I really wanted this to be like a very heart place, and I really appreciate you guys bringing that like open-heartedness and sharing like your questions, sharing your experiences. Entonces, I really, really appreciate you. I will see you next week. We've got 2 more to go. Next week is going to be ethics and role. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Besos y abrazos. Bye. Gracias. Thank you.